Thank you so much, Monica. I appreciate the opportunity to talk today. There are two things that Premier Daniel Andrews could have done that would have saved lives and dramatically reduced the impact of the coronavirus on all Victorians. They're the same two things that mankind has always done in response to pandemics. You quarantine the sick and you protect the vulnerable. Sadly, Daniel Andrews failed spectacularly at both of those things. Now, he likes to say to journalists that he takes responsibility, but in reality, he's actually just passing the buck. Take, for example, the fact that he's trying to pretend that the infections in nursing homes are actually the fault of the federal government and not his own failing. He's basically saying that he has the power to lock down commission housing flats, send water police out to find people who've gone fishing, set up checkpoints all over the state where law-abiding people are asked for their papers, please. And yet, according to him, there's nothing he could have done to protect nursing homes in Victoria. That's somehow not his fault. Keeping our nursing homes, our older residents, and our immunocompromised people safe could have been done at a fraction of the cost of the current shutdowns. And more lives would have been saved because we would have been protecting the people that are actually vulnerable to this virus. But Daniel Andrews insists that this virus, and I quote, does not discriminate on the basis of age. That is such an ignorant and anti-science claim that it would be laughable coming from anyone, but it's frankly scary coming from a state premier. The truth is that the coronavirus is about 130 times deadlier for old people than it is for younger people. And yet, we're all locked up as if it's just as much of a risk to all of us. And we're all locked up because Premier Daniel Andrews failed to get the basics right. He failed to quarantine the sick, and he failed to protect the vulnerable. There is a disaster happening in Victoria, but it's not the virus that's caused it. It's an arrogant, out-of-touch, ham-fisted and scientifically illiterate premier who ignores what we know about the virus and acts as if any and all policies, no matter how destructive, are justified if it just saves someone from the coronavirus. There is a better way. Everyone agrees that the only way out of this mess is through herd immunity. Most people assume that this means a vaccine, but actually our immune systems are what give us immunity. The job of the vaccine is to activate and to challenge our immune system into a response that gives us that immunity. And we can do the same thing by challenging it with the virus itself. Think about it. If we take every measure necessary to actually protect the vulnerable, the elderly, the immunocompromised, and then let the virus spread amongst the low-risk population, younger people with no comorbidities, the health system would be put under very little strain because most young healthy people who catch the coronavirus don't even get symptoms. So, and definitely, very few of them ever need a hospital. So once 40 to 50% of healthy people have had and recovered from the virus, it would then die out due to herd immunity, just the same as it would through a vaccination program. And at that point, everyone can come out of lockdown and be safe, including the elderly, including the immunocompromised. The answer is not to try and stop everyone from getting the virus. The answer is to try and stop the vulnerable from getting the virus. I believe firmly in this strategy, so much so that I volunteered publicly back in April to be infected with the coronavirus and then to self-isolate and quarantine until I was no longer infectious to others, so that there would be no chance of me passing it on to someone who's vulnerable, because that's the last thing that I or any of us would want to do. If enough of us did that, then the virus would die out, and everyone would be protected by that herd immunity, including the elderly and the vulnerable. If we'd started that back in April when I first proposed it, then we would already be done. The coronavirus would be history. It would be behind us, and we would have got through at a fraction of the cost that we're now facing. And we're still, how far through are we? We don't know. It could still be years more of this kind of in and out of quarantine. But Daniel Andrews denies the science. He failed to get the basics right. And now he's created a disaster of his own making. He's destroying people's lives, sending people bankrupt, pushing many people into depression or even worse. All because he couldn't get the basics right. Daniel Andrews says that he takes responsibility, and I say prove it. Step up, or actually, step down. Admit that you got it wrong, and make room for your replacement to come in and change direction. Do it for the sake of all Victorians, but please, Do it soon, because the damage that you're doing is permanent. The virus is temporary, but we have to survive the real disaster, and that disaster is Dan Andrews. Thank you very much, Monica.